you're under attack. I think that most middle-class members know that, but I would say if you look at the shipyard right now and you look at the sequester, you recognize that we are still at risk all these years later of hurting workers, hurting national defense, and just hurting the general economy because of the sequester. Now, whose great idea was this, right? When we look around, you can't find two hands go up in Congress. Nobody owns it except for one group. Well, the Republicans are pointing fingers at the Dems, and the Dems are pointing fingers at the Republicans. The Tea Party's going, we did it. Can you thank us? Because we're really proud of doing this. And this is the problem that we're having in Washington right now, that I feel like there's three political parties down there. There's the Democrats, there's the Republicans, and then there's what's called the Republican Study Group, also known as the Tea Party. And they're a huge force. And Speaker Boehner is really, he's a leader without foot soldiers right now. And so what's happening is there are many bills that Democrats could work with Speaker Boehner and work with the Republicans, except that the Republican Study Group won't have it. And you see that played out in many ways. They have a rule. How many people have heard of the Danny Hastert rule? Okay, we need to talk to people about this. We need to talk to our legislators about this. The Danny Hastert rule was named after, appropriately, Hastert, who at the time was the speaker, and he had this rule that you never put a bill on the floor of the House unless the majority of the majority support that. So think about that. He was Republican, and he told everybody that bills wouldn't come to the floor unless the majority of the Republicans supported it. Now think about where we are right now. And you think Speaker Boehner can get a majority to put something on the floor to work with Democrats? No. So it is difficult, and it's at least as bad as it looks, you know, when we're doing it. Now, a couple of times we've been able to get Speaker Boehner to put something on the floor without full support. One of them was the Violence Against Women Act. That was a huge success, and I give the Republicans and the Democrats credit for working together and getting that passed. We also saw the aid for Sandy, which is unbelievable that we consider that a legislative victory, because it used to be that when you had damage like that, you just did the right thing and you didn't have to fight about it for several months. But that's where we are now. So that was wonderful. And there have been some other votes that we've been able to come together on. But for the most part, legislatively, it is very difficult. I had somebody who was interviewing me on the radio say, well, if everybody hates the sequester, why can't you just cancel it? And I said, well, everybody doesn't hate the sequester. We do have bills trying to cancel it. We've actually tried to put it on the floor a number of ways, and we have been shut down. They won't bring it to the floor. So I think part of what we all have to do is talk to our friends and neighbors and co-workers and explain to them that we don't run the floor. The floor is run by the majority, and the minority can try to amend, which we do, and we can try to do motions to recommit, to add something before a bill gets passed. But generally, that's not successful. So we don't have a choice. We can't walk to the floor and say, oh, you know, here's my bill to cancel the sequester. Believe me, if we could, we would, and I think that a lot of Republicans would like to see some action there, because they too are starting to feel the pain. Now, interestingly, if Congress really wants to do something, they can. And all we have to do is look at last week, when lots of members of Congress, including me, sat on the runway for an hour and a half or 2 hours, and they got back to Washington, and within a couple days it was fixed. Wonderful, right? So, and we were in a tough spot, because really, you don't want to fix just a little bit of it, you want to fix all of it, because so many people are impacted. For example, Head Start. Who wants to hurt the children? Who wants to keep Head Start away from children? Who wants to be the one to go in there and say to these little ones, you're out, you're out, you're out, and by the way, it's a sequester, so understand, it's for your own good. Who wants to be the one to tell the people for Meals on Wheels that are really experiencing cuts, you, and you won't get that knock on the door today. You won't get a hot meal, but we'll be back in 2 days or 3 days. But who wants to be the one in the shipyard to say, well, you know, okay, we said work at this rate and we're going to pay you, but, and I know you have a mortgage or rent and we know you got kids and whatever, but understand, you know, it's a sequester. Understand what? Understand that Democrats and Republicans signed onto something that couldn't work out because of the difference between them. It couldn't work out. And is it because, and the answer is yes, is it because the Tea Party held this country hostage on raising the debt ceiling that forced this kind of deal? Yes. So mistakes, you know, I think it's important to wind the tape back so we can see how we got to the sequester, what started it, the mistakes that were made there, saying cut 50% from defense and 50% from other programs, domestic programs, and don't question, just, you know, cut evenly. Every time you're going to have a cut, it'll be half on the domestic side and half on the defense side. I like what Steny Hoyer said the other day. He said, you know, if a family has to cut back on the budget, since they love to talk about families with their budgets, if a family has to cut back on the budget and they go to the movies on Friday night and they pay their rent once a month, they don't say, well, look, why don't we cut out half the movie money and half the rent? No, they say, cut out the movie money and we'll keep the rent. So it shows the ridiculousness of the, well, we'll just, every cut that comes, half here and half there, and indiscriminate, just, you know, across the board. So this is what we find ourselves caught up in, and it's not true that we can't undo it, and I think you already know that, but this is a rolling wave. And what we saw, we just started this in March, and what we have seen so far is just a little taste of what's coming. So I believe that we will eventually cancel the sequester because it's just so many times members of Congress can go back to their district and hear the bad news without getting active. So I still have hope that we will fix this. Now, as for budgets, you know, we have the House budget. Luckily, it's not going anywhere. We have the President's budget, and yes, the Senate produced a budget. So the problem now is that the House, and this is the majority, will not send anybody to conference with the Senate budget. So that's usually the procedure, you know, Senate passes a budget, House passes a budget, then you sit down, you conference, and you compromise, and you figure it out, and then you send it on to the President. So on that budget, they used to like to say how the Senate didn't pass a budget. And it was true, and I think the Senate should have passed a budget, but they didn't. Now they did pass a budget, but it turns out maybe they weren't expecting it, they just weren't ready. But there's no plan to go to conference right now to get a budget. So I think we're going to just keep bumping along without a real blueprint. So it's not great news that I'm sharing with you right now, but there are things. You see this Make It in America button? The House, under the leadership of Democrats, although I think we do have some Republicans there, but Steny Hoyer has brought back the Make It in America plan, and it's a 4-point plan, and I think one of the most important parts of that for working men and women is to create an infrastructure bank, because we need jobs. This is the issue. We've seen some job growth. We've had 38 months of private sector job growth, seen cuts in the public sector, which is unfortunate. It is a drag on the economy. But if we kept going and we put an infrastructure bank in and we continued the investment, we would see more jobs. And with jobs, we would see people paying taxes and we would see a stronger economy. Now, you know that we've been arguing about this in Congress forever, about what's the best approach. Is it just austerity, where you just cut everything, or is it a mixture of cuts, you know, very careful cuts, and investment in people and in jobs, etc.? And the Democrats' budget calls for a mixture. The Republicans feel that they've already done all the tax increases they're going to do, and so they're not interested in finding money for investment because they don't think they need to raise any more revenue. Now that's a really important point about what's happening in Washington. If you don't have more revenue, you can't do all the things that we know the country needs. Communication infrastructure, you know, the highways, that'd be great to see some investment there. Businesses would like to see a better rail system. They want better roads. They need them in order. We see the problems here with our bridge, the New Hampshire-Maine border, arguing about who's going to provide the money for that. In order to create the jobs, in order for businesses to be able to do the things that they need to do, that will hire workers, they have to have a degree of confidence that we'll be investing in this country, in our infrastructure. The infrastructure bank does that. We should pass this, but the problem, again, is we need revenue. And when I'm talking about revenue, I'm not talking about hitting the middle class and saying, each one of you pony up a little bit more in taxes. We're talking about tax reform that says to companies like Facebook that pay 0 federal income tax. By the way, anybody pay 0 federal income tax in this room? If you do, please give me the name of your accountant, because we just saw April 15th and it wasn't so much fun for us either. 0 federal income tax. GE was in the 0 federal income tax. It's so many of them. So it makes sense that you say to people and businesses who have not paid, who have had lobbyists inserting really helpful language into the tax code, it's time to change that. Now, we're not talking about small businesses. They need relief. We know that. And we're not talking about the middle class. We are talking about making sure that our tax structure is fair. And so people who have escaped for a long time, and this is not just Democrats talking about Republicans. Please understand, Senator Coburn, who is a very conservative Republican, obviously, on the Senate side, has written a booklet, and it's called Subsidies of the Rich and Famous. So he knows that this country needs revenue, and he writes in that booklet that what's happening is many middle-class people have to work 2 jobs because they are carrying the burden. And he talks about people who get to write off their yachts, they get to write off their gambling debts, they get to write off their planes. And so, again, I'll repeat the name because you can find it online, and I think it'd be very helpful. And it's called Subsidies of the Rich and Famous, and it's Senator Coburn. So, and I admire him for that. I don't think we vote together very often, but I'm sure we'd vote the same way on that. So, in order to do what we need to do for working men and women, we need to make sure that those who have managed to duck the fair share of responsibility come forward and do that. This Make It in America plan actually helps that, because one part is bringing American businesses back home and offering, which is essential. And to do that, we're going to have to do some trading, and I think compromise is a great thing. And I'm for that. I think any way that we can bring American companies here, support American workers, is the way to go now. So looking at the legislative trail that I've just followed with you, it is complicated. And until we see some more of a shift, which I think will come eventually, more of a shift inside the Republican Party, where more moderate Republicans defeat Tea Partiers, I think when we get there, we'll see Republicans and Democrats able to work a little bit better. So that doesn't mean that we're not able to do anything. Again, I point to the what we did for the flights a week ago. We can, and one of the keys to this is knowing each other better and a little more civility. And I do have good news on that front. That I think the civility meter has gone up, that people are trying harder to at least talk to each other. And I remember from 10 and now this time, and it's definitely a nicer atmosphere than it was in those waning months of 2010. So that's good news, and I think being able to say hello and be able to have a couple of personal comments to each other help create some kind of a dialogue. But we are basically, from my point of view, split into 3 groups right now, and that's the challenge. So looking at the sequester, I'm hoping that as people come back and forth from their districts and they hear a lot of unhappy people, they start to respond and we don't just do it piecemeal. Looking at the Make It America plan, I don't see us putting an infrastructure bank in right now. I don't see us doing most of the things, but maybe some tax reform. And then the immigration is probably the spot where we have the most common goals right now. Not totally, and I'm not sure what's going to happen after that horrible event in Boston, but we have been on a pathway to finding some kind of compromise and a program that would serve the needs of this country, the needs of American workers, and also, take care of some of the business concerns there. So it's not the best message I've ever given you, but I would say, as always, that there's always hope, and there's effort being made on both sides of the aisle to try to bring us together a little bit more. And my pledge is to always be there speaking up for you. Because when I speak up for you, I'm also speaking up for me. And I get this. I get it on a level. I've lived it, I've worked it. I think most of you know my history of working in factories to get through school. And nothing is going to dissuade me or get me to quiet down. The final thing I wanted to talk about is Social Security and Medicare, because we're all headed in that direction. Whether we like it or not, that number's coming up, and we're going to need that. That is the bad news for all of us, because there is compromise with Republicans and Democrats, and it's not the compromise we want. We have President Obama, who I think is opening the door too much to this, and then we have Republicans who I think are probably pretty surprised and also happy that they're talking about what they call entitlement reform, but really is benefit reduction for working men and women. And then we have Democrats who are saying, well, we really do have to figure out how to save money, and so something needs to be done. So we have to say yes to be responsible. 2 points there. First of all, Social Security is not creating one nickel of this deficit. Don't let anybody fool you about this. Not one nickel. And it could be fixed tomorrow if Congress had the courage. Just raise the cap, like they've always done. We don't have to cut the benefits, and we shouldn't. More than half of American seniors live under the wages of $22,600 a year. What are we thinking about that we would do that? And when I talk to members of my party and they talk like that, I look at them and I say, what do you think they were talking about during the Depression? Did you see members of Congress during the Depression say, wow, there's tons of money lying around. Let's go create Social Security? I said, of course not. They created it because there wasn't money lying around, because it was hurting older people, and we had to do something. And so if they could take care of that in the middle of a depression, are you telling me we can't now? No. So that just can't be. The other part that we all have to be concerned about is Medicare. Medicare does have problems, no question about it. And we are going to have to get more money into these programs, and we'll have to get more efficient, and we'll have to find all the ways that we can save money. But Medicare is the reason that we have the healthiest generation, senior generation in history. Medicare is essential to this nation's good health, so it's not only morally the right thing to do, economically it's the best choice we can make. And to say to people that are going into the retirement that you guys are just going to have to pick up some of the slack here when they don't have any extra money is morally wrong, and frankly, I think it's really dumb, because we'll have to do something. We can't just push people aside to the curb. We will have to come back and do something. So why would we do this now? So that's my worry, and that's where the compromise appears to be right now, where they're getting along the best, and that's where I don't want to see a compromise. Not on benefits. Working out everything else, yes. How do you save money in Medicare? Well, here's one little idea. We could save $200 billion in 10 years if we negotiate the price of prescription drugs. Why can't we do that? That's a lot of money. So, and there's lots of other things too, but you don't hear them. You don't hear them talking about ways to raise revenue to pay for these programs. So we need your voices. We need your members' voices down there. We need them to say no. We will not allow them to dismantle programs that Americans rely on. They need them, and they are for the best of our country's future. So we cannot allow them to dismantle the program.